I'm just gonna... Wait, not loud enough. I can't... Okay.
We should definitely keep that. Yeah, it's like how in order to claim your Spotify artist account,
exactly,
you need to
you went through that whole...
You need to have and actually have a song.
Exactly. It's hell of complicated, right?
Yeah, that's something we've definitely learned. I feel like I've learned that by proxy through you. And watching you and hearing
the name changes,
your tales throughout the years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one place I was thinking that we could start, right? Which is give context to Late Bloomer and the name and its origins.
Where do you think Late Bloomer started? We kind of like met at this group show called Potluck by Potluck.
It was in Teluk Kurau.
Yeah, where a few of our friends, our very good friends, were involved. And interestingly enough, like some of them, like I didn't know at all. Some of them you didn't know at all. And I think our orbits sort of crossed, like everyone's orbits sort of crossed. Like I became good friends with Cher. I got to know, and we knew Chantel and Isabel. I got to know Cheryl. I got to know Cher. So it's been interesting, and Bernie was involved as well.
Bernie was also involved.
I'm not very familiar or acquainted, but I've always seen the work that Bernie has been doing and curating. And
yeah. Steph was the one who invited me to that show, actually.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I have her to thank, I feel, for a lot of the present day.
This Big Bang that is chaos that ensued.
Yeah, the uncertainty of the last several years.
I remember it was like a walk to, amidst a very chaotic day, a walk to Tapao, seafood bihun and Hokkien mee and dinner for the rest of them and buy drinks.
Yeah.
And we had to walk along like the park connector.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear two people or more's recollection of an event.
Yeah.
Because I know from speaking to you that that's your like distinct memory of how we bonded. Whereas I always think, I think back to like when we sat on the couch and when I was discussing with you.
Oh yeah.
Just my vision for Later, which was the short film that we ended up collaborating on.
Yes, so this like preceded everything, and this preceded like anything musical that we started working on. Which, I remember that moment on the couch when you told me like, oh, you're looking for like a sound guy.
Yes, I mean, so really, to answer your question, when do you think Late Bloomer? When was the seed of Late Bloomer planted? I think it depends on how philosophical you want to get, right? Because was it when I knew that I wanted to make Later and was actively seeking someone to helm its sound and its score?
Yeah.
Or was it the few years before that when I actually made my first narrative short without a sound person and only retrospectively realized the dire mistake that I had made. So I guess it depends.
I mean,
on
even
how
then,
you look at
with a sound person for Later, we were already like really struggling through, and I think like it's go watch the film. It's on Sal's website, and we'll definitely link it like somewhere. It's an interesting, like really interesting piece.
Yeah, I was given the opportunity to like think about it again recently because I was describing to someone my work. And so I watched bits of it, and I was so struck by how much of an artifact of youth it was. And also just that, like, even just the crucible in which it was constructed and made and put together, I feel you don't recognize the uniqueness of the situation or the circumstances that you are in the time. But then when you look back, you're like, wow, I can never recreate that. That was like lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, I think this is something like we didn't notice back then. But yeah, I completely agree with you. When I look back at later, it certainly is something that is extremely raw and special for what it is, and it's definitely impossible to recreate. But I will argue that a lot of the spark of how Late Bloomer started was originated from later, and from, I think, not just like making later, but like the friendship, the processes, the first time on the couch when you asked me whether I wanted to read your script, and I was like, okay, send it to me, and then like I didn't reply you for like a few
month.
weeks, a month.
Yeah, I think it was a month. Yeah.
Okay, so honest like story is that like after you sent me, I think I was like super busy, and then I forgot, and I think like 3 weeks later or something, like when I was checking my messages, I was like, oh no, shit, I'm supposed to read this script.
Yeah, that is on brand. That is very. I feel like that's also something we need to put a pin in, and then at some point return to, which is your own journey of like of all the juggling, and the exclusively freelance nature that you've lived, the freelance nature of the life that you've lived over the last few years.
It is an anomaly. Like I've come to recognize that like it's not normal, and it's strange. Yeah.
But I also just want to expand on that spirit in which we made later to explain, which was like, I think the official line is, it's a film about figuring things out.
Yeah.
And it was just a very youthful attempt on my part to learn how to make a film by making a film. Just doing it because if I wanted to be, whether I wanted to be a filmmaker or whether I wanted to be someone who makes films, then I had to make a film.
But your process, like as both a scriptwriter and a filmmaker, was one that was uniquely like specific to later, and I think this is very hard to replicate also, because like you involve like people that you had like relationships with, your friends, your colleagues who became your friends,
as well as a couple of friends of friends, including yourself.
Yeah.
And I mean, the crew was literally just you and me.
Yes.
And so you were on boom, and I was behind the camera, as well as making my best effort to direct.
Grip, setting up tripods, gaff, tape, everything, like literally everything.
Yeah, I don't even think we had the luxury of tape.
That's true. Yeah.
Already, even at that time, I had thought I was already self-conscious or self-aware, but comparing that time to today, it's already there's such a difference. And you can only imagine moving forward how that's going to keep progressing.
Yes, look at this.
The premeditation.
Will
increase. I mean, if we want to like segue into how Late Bloomer came about, that's really organically and without premeditation. That's how Late Bloomer evolved, right?
Which is also a unique thing that we can't recreate. And I would, now that I'm thinking of it, I realize that for me at least, like subconsciously, not consciously, like Late Bloomer is the soundtrack of Later.
Wow, you've never shared this with me.
No, because I've never thought of it like that until now.
They do. I mean, okay, let's just get
Not
the elephant.
literally the soundtrack,
Of
but
course.
it's kind of like if it's a movie that had a lot of songs inside and like people compile it into an album, not of the score, but the soundtrack made up of like the songs that the characters listen to and like all the songs that describe the characters' lives and stuff like for me, Late Bloomer is that kind of soundtrack of, it's like a mixtape of Later.
Their names aside, Later and
Yeah.
Late Bloomer. So let's get that out of the way. But I guess you could say they are companion pieces down to the overlap, right? In which they were made.
The social overlap.
Say more.
Before going to the social overlap, I would say like, we were playing like multiple roles, hats, identities. And I think through that, like specifically the moment when I had to figure out like what was going on in the end credits song. And I remember that was like already nearly a year into post-production. It's not even a year into production. So this is like a year and a half into the entire production process, but a year into post-production. And we were sort of like, we had our like, I think, second or third draft of the cut of the film, and then I was supposed to start figuring out the end credits song so that you could have an idea of like how to like cut into it and things like that. And then that was when like you sort of like sneakily revealed that like you had a SoundCloud.
I guess that was a very pivotal.
No, yeah, because that would completely change things, because up until then I only knew you as like, and because I didn't knew you as personally as I know you now today, like what I got was like, okay, you are someone who writes stories and makes films, and you're passionate about literature, writing films. And so like the sound thing was the one that was like, it's the chaos element that was thrown into the mix.
I do remember your reaction upon listening to maybe the one track that I have on there.
To 450,000 views of that track, of a cover.
Talk about lightning in a bottle,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
But I do remember your reaction, which was it was much appreciated. It really was very special, because you were responding to it with such open-heartedness, and your response told me that there was something worth dwelling and exploring.
I think especially in a film that you are making yourself, and it's a film that, it's not just your film, it's a film that involves your life, your stories. Why I felt it was so special when I discovered that was that because of how intertwined it is. And it wasn't just like making a film and, okay, this is a film, but it was more than that. That's why I felt like, okay, this is something we should definitely explore in the end credits song.
And it's so interesting to hear you say all that, because I feel like we don't know what we don't know, right? We only know what we know. So to us, what we do and what we make and our output may not seem that remarkable. It may actually seem like the deviation from what you are quote unquote supposed to be doing, what the so-called path is. When we were putting out the messaging for Later, I remember it's only in hindsight that I realized that what we are able to describe right now, this is the story of Later. This is the pure story of Later.
We couldn't have realized it back then.
Exactly, but back then I feel like maybe there was still some kind of phantom narrative that I was trying to
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
squeeze later into to make
Yeah.
perhaps pass it off as more credible or with more authority.
Yeah. I remember the triggering comments were so what's the story about?
Oh, just from everyone. Yeah, I mean that was my
Yeah,
own
yeah.
learning process, right? Which is
Yeah.
learning how to talk about my art and about my work and to own it. That's been my path.
But actually, I think that and now that I think of it, like because like later was like written, produced, shot roughly around like 2018, 2019. Like I feel the landscape has changed so much, and I feel that if like later was screened today again, the context would shift. It would be interesting to see.
I mean, there are definitely still at least a couple of scenes that even today or maybe like last week.
No, I think they relate even more. That's
exactly.
What I'm saying.
I was. Yeah, it's a very nice feeling, and it reminds you that sometimes art can only be fully evaluated with time and distance. Even if it's just looking back at your own work, because there are a couple of scenes that still distinctly speak to me, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe it. Because I mean, what we're not mentioning is that COVID happened in between, right? COVID happened between the first time I picked up a pen to write Late Bloomer, which was not even titled Late Bloomer, and to its release.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time we don't slow down enough for ourselves. That's what I feel. I mean, that's why I feel when you are a late bloomer, or you feel that you are a late bloomer, even more so, you wouldn't have that capacity, or you wouldn't think to even slow down. And that was certainly like my case, as like you probably like know very well. The end credits song that we worked on for later, which eventually did not make the cut for Late Bloomer, which I agree, like it's in a very different phase. It's very raw. It's another like lightning in a bottle situation. It is. I'm still very fond of it, but like it. I think that was what opened up the possibility to even dream about Late Bloomer. Yeah.
For you?
Yeah, for me.
Do you want to say more? Do you have anything more to add?
I think it was from that where I felt that what you were passionate about within how you made films and how you wrote stories, that for me came to life in a more direct manner when you were performing, when you were singing, quote unquote singing, or like vocalizing, or like making music. I mean, through music, I think your message still carried the same weight. And that's when I realized that, like, okay, there is a chance to expand on this, or to explore a little bit more and see like what happens. And in the most unlikely sense also, I've never imagined that I would write music for rap or for words, or even a song, much less to say. So this was definitely an unexpected door that I stumbled into.
Yeah. Can you imagine if there wasn't this door? How different our lives would have been over the last 3 years.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I mean, do you want to speak about how what trajectory it sent you on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't realize this, but now that I think of it, I was really at a very, very different point, and it led me on a different trajectory suddenly. Like I think I was more like raw, coming out of like classical music, and like I was studying at the conservatory in Singapore, and emerging out of there, I was just trying to find my voice. I was just trying to explore new things. I was excited by a lot of new things that I didn't think to explore before in music, like electronic music production and composing my own songs, my own pieces, and using the instruments that I was familiar with in very, very different ways. And I was just being excited by those sound worlds. And of course, like thinking very expansively, which I think, regardless of classical music or not, is something that I've always done. So, like, to create worlds with those sounds and build landscapes and journeys where you go through those pieces, not just as pieces of music, but pieces where deep thinking is like activated. And yeah, so like I wasn't bound by genre per se or culture. I think culture is the word here. Like I wasn't that tuned in to like not necessarily pop culture, but in general, culture or the reasons why people create music. I was just moved mainly by the pure power of music, the pureness within music. And I think after our meeting, that was when I was like just starting to be aware of how heavily culture and music, community culture, tradition, people, relationships are intertwined with the history, development, and the future of music. And I thought I wasn't involved in it, but just by being someone who writes music in this time and day, in this present time and day, like you are definitely involved some way in this like orbit. So I was just like opening my eyes to realizing about these connections, these synergies. Yeah, and it really made me think about like actually it only made me think much later because I didn't have the time to think as you would know. Yeah, and but it certainly stuck in my mind like that, okay, I needed to like look at the bigger picture and see like where do I sit within this orbit. And it's not really about like comparing or like, but it's about just knowing your place within the cosmos of like things.
And so you feel a part of it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think, yeah, you feel a part of it and you know your part to play and you know how to relate to the people, the community, the music, the artists, and in a very genuine way, in a very like in a very sincere way. Yeah. And I think that changes the way you write music as well and the way you perform music as well. Yeah.
You have mentioned though, and I think we've bonded over this, about how you have felt like an outsider. Is that not to say that you either have to feel like one or the other. Obviously it can be, you can feel like both. Where do you sit now and on that spectrum? What are your feelings around that at this time?
So okay, so I felt that like before I felt the need to be part of something in order to be quote unquote valued, be it like a clique, a culture, a collective, and also to fit in with a certain like group of people or sound or like and I initially thought that like, oh, I had to go towards those directions. I mean, like that's pop culture, right? You always work towards like what's popular and you always like stick with the trends. And I thought that was or subconsciously for me, that was like the markers of like what I should be hitting the KPI. But at the same time, I knew that that wasn't truly me. And so right now at this present moment, I feel like by being mindful about like who you are, what you like, what you dislike, and what you want to explore, what you are passionate about, what you believe in, and also being aware of the community around you, that already helps you to find your place. And I think you don't have to struggle or fight who you are. And there is always what I believe is that there is always a way to relate to someone else, because we are all here and we're all living in this country, in this world, and in this space and time, and it's okay to be different. And that's what transpires and transcends now, that I feel like I rather be who I want to be. And for me, that is more in my music and letting the music speak for itself, rather than trying to change blindly. Because I think when we're young, when we're late bloomers, we try and change, we try and adapt, and that's a good thing. But also sometimes we adapt blindly without making space for ourselves, without being kind to ourselves.
Some of us might go on to do great things, some of us might fuck up, some of us might suffer. But we were all here today. We were here together for a moment, and this memory will serve us somewhere down the line. This memory of when we were all feeling good and feeling kind and feeling whole.
Well, should we do it this? I think it's
sure.
the perfect time to
Exactly
go into how the making of Late Bloomer kickstarted this 3-year process for you of your alias changes and to arriving at everything that you've just shared.
Exactly. So I think not many people know that, like, the whole project of Planeswalker, the alias, and even like the releases that I made under my own name were actually like all strategically planned out to lay the path for Late Bloomer.
Yes, I'm very honored.
Okay, so we talk about like your film like later, and the end credit song being something that kickstarts something. And I think from there, what happened was that we eventually wrote like a few other tracks together, and we sort of like put together this like 5 or 6 track thing. And then we were hurriedly like, okay, we want to release it. And okay, so what happened was that we invited a few of our friends, each in groups of 2, in pairs, to my studio to listen to this mixtape or this like album that we put together in less than 3 months.
Yeah, weeks.
In like 2 months, because we were putting it together for a sort of showing, a casual showing, and so we gather our friends, groups of 2, and ask them to listen to the mixtape and give us comments. And I think it's from that we realized that the expectations that we had of the work weren't...
There's that meme, right, where it's expectation versus reality, perhaps.
Yeah.
Those were the fires in which we were burnished.
Yeah. And I think that was a point of like deep reflection. It was like, oh, actually, like, this is how it actually is. And it's the funny thing where when you get someone else in the room to listen to your own track, and just by having someone else in the room, you hear it differently at the very moment. Immediately you hear all the mistakes and all the things, the quirks. Yeah, so I think that was it. And
they were essentially telling us, you're not ready.
Yeah. And it got me thinking deeper. Like yes, like technically, musically, in terms of like even the songwriting, the tracks, like they weren't ready. But that got me on a deeper level of like, wait a minute, like artistically, creatively, and where am I heading and what kind of sound am I finding? And yeah, maybe it's not ready because there's no path yet also. And I had to do other things. And I felt it wasn't time to release a project such as Late Bloomer. Because like at that time the reason was because I felt that my audience hasn't gotten to know who I am yet and like what kind of music I make and I love. But now that I think back retrospectively, it's mainly because like I didn't know who I was back then, and I didn't know what kind of sound or what kind of musician or what kind of writer I was. And I think it didn't seem this way. I think I always felt very convicted, but it was a little bit misguided and I think little bit like infatuated. Like I wasn't really truly aware of like who I was yet. And so that led me on the journey of like, okay, I should give it time, and we definitely had to rework all the tracks.
Yes, I went off and I rewrote.
Yeah, I remember
95% to maybe 97%.
And we had to re-record all the vocals.
Of course. But I mean that was like I think we both want to stress that was the best thing that could have happened to the album, right?
Yeah.
That was the most benevolent response that we could have gotten. Brutal and benevolent. I know personally it made me really want to up my own game. So I feel like, well, you went on down one path. My path parallel to that was to continue honing my craft. I mean, up to that point, I had always identified as a writer.
Yeah.
And yet, I guess what you learn is you still always have to keep practicing, and you're never really, as where you want to be.
So how was it for you how did you find yourself in Late Bloomer? Because like what you said, we started out working on the film and the script that you wrote, and you always identify as a writer. And what did you feel at the starting point of Late Bloomer, and like how did you find your sound and yourself?
Even though when we met, I had written a film, but I think as you also came to discover, I'm more of a platform agnostic writer, and so even in the years leading up to that, I was actually writing my own bedroom raps.
Yeah.
So to me, it was very. To me, that was that expression, that mode of expression of through rap, I guess, was also very natural to me.
Because you were like aware of like the culture of rap, and you had like rappers, artists that you were following.
Yeah, I really looked up to.
Yeah.
Who all these polymaths.
Yeah.
So they were. Yeah, I guess they were. Their output manifested.
And I think
in different ways.
What's crucial that I noticed was that these artists that you were looking up to that had a hand in rap were artists that, exactly as what you said, they were polymaths, and they were not known just for their rap, but they had other artistic pursuits.
Yeah, they just did what they wanted to do.
Exactly.
I think they just did what they wanted to do.
Because I felt you were very, very inspired by that kind of ethos.
And that was very much my my mindset.
Yeah.
And my being when I went into this at that time, this unnamed project, right? Which was just, let's just write and let's just have fun, you know?
Yeah.
But I think that that point of feedback was when things did get a bit more real. It was, you know, it's a bit of like it's like a shower of cold water.
When a metronome is turned on.
Yeah, and you realize that all writing is rewriting in a sense. Like I think, it's just, I guess it's just different, right? It's different contexts.
Yeah.
And it's there are just different avenues for whether you just want to like write and have fun and express yourself, and or push yourself to see what else you can come up with and how you can bend you know the written form, how much further you can take it.
Yeah, because I do feel like both your rewriting and your writing and rewriting and your delivery of the lyrics is something that's, again, it's very uniquely to you. It's very unique to Late Bloomer. It's not something that's like that you were trying to copy, or although I get that we were very aware of certain styles of rapping and certain like techniques of rapping, and we went down that whole rabbit hole. But it's something that's like unique to you and the project.
Yeah, it definitely comes from a very personal place.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what binds my work. Well, we've touched upon the Planeswalker stuff, and maybe we've alluded to what happened in the last 3 years since we redoubled our commitment to releasing Late Bloomer, an improved version of Late Bloomer. But you want to perhaps go a bit more in depth into it?
So I mean, with the Empty Blue Sky going into Planeswalker, I mean, with the Empty Blue Sky, I was mainly just experimenting around with everything and anything, like using field recordings, hitting the table, the cups around me, anything, like field recording around Pongo, and it was very exciting and very raw. And again, I look back at it, and a lot of my close friends who have listened to that album have told me that it is something special, and I agree. Like, it is. Yet, like, I felt I was at a place where I was like very raw, and so I wanted to sort of focus like where I was going, and at that time it was kind of like centered around like trying to develop an identity that could be centered with sort of an audience, or to grow together with an audience. And that's how I felt like through the suggestion of like my friends that I might want to leave the moniker of like the Empty Blue Sky and like go on to something new. And that's how Planeswalker eventually surfaced. Yeah, and the idea was always to forge a path ahead that was more distinct, more bold for Late Bloomer.
And what were some of the characteristics of Planeswalker? I mean, earlier you said that felt, looking back, that felt maybe like it was veering away rather than going, deep into towards your core.
I think certainly like it's not any different. In terms of like the reason why I made the music I made like under those different aliases, like to me it wasn't a different sound, it was the same sound. Yes, I got technically better. I had more experts working with me in terms of like mixing the album, mastering the album, the EP, and the tracks, and of course that contributed to like a better sound or a different sound. But for me, it was still the same sound. It wasn't like, oh, under Planeswalker, I would only make this kind of music, and under like a different moniker, I would make a different kind of music. I recognize that kind of idea, and I see the artists who do that, but at the same time, I don't subscribe to that. And the reason why I don't subscribe to that is because for me, music is my own journey and it's a spiritual relationship that I have with it. And for me, it's no different if I make a piece that is situated in a particular genre versus another genre.
Because it all comes from you, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
This thought just occurred to me. Would you say that perhaps it's been an exercise in communication, communicating
Yeah,
your
pretty much.
yourself?
Yeah, or getting diluted and feeling that I have to talk more about myself, but actually not acting on it and showing more of myself. And so along the ways, like I realized that I just had to be myself and understand the mechanics of how to talk about that and how to still be genuine about myself when I'm talking about my work. And that has always been and still is a challenge to this day and still a learning journey. Yeah.
Do you want to give some insight into also, maybe, I don't know, maybe people are wondering, maybe they could not care less, but why the wait, right, for late bloomer? Like what did you feel had to go into the interim to pave the way? Do you want to talk about Akasha? Do you want to talk about the second name change back to Mervin Wong? All these things, they kind of slipped into the timeline.
Well, I think each project has their own world and their own stories, and each project is sort of and I like to think of it as like they are their own world and they're their own like book. So like Akasha is its own thing, Perihelion was its own thing, Entity was its own thing, and the people that they involve are like varyingly different as well in terms of like who designed the album cover, who like worked on the mixing and all that. So for me, it's like I think go and listen to it and find your own find what speaks to you about each of these distinct worlds. And for me, they are very, very different worlds. Yeah. I think I mean I would say like Aphelion, Perihelion and Entity sort of belong in one chapter. And Resonance in the Air, Akasha, onwards, Entanglement, they belong to like the next chapter. Yeah.
And I think they all just kind of happened, right? I think that's also maybe something to take away for people that there was, I suppose there was a grand plan which was to eventually release Late Bloomer into circumstances that we would feel more satisfied with.
And proud of the work.
But those details were definitely not in the original sketch.
I think interesting to know is that like it's always like after Perihelion in like 2019 Perihelion.
Wow.
Yeah, right. So after Perihelion, I thought like, okay, it's time to release Late Bloomer, and then like it didn't happen. And then like after Entity, it was like, okay, it's now time to release Late Bloomer, but still that didn't happen. And I think definitely a lot of things happened between those years, like 2020 to 2021, and then like many more things happened. Like I changed everything back to my own name, and again the reason for this is roughly what I spoke about before, which is that I feel that regardless of alias, it doesn't denote a difference in sound of or style. It's still me, and I'm not trying to find a different sound with a different alias. And I've realized that just why not just use my own name?
The name Late Bloomer is extremely justified.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah.
Conclusion.
Yeah. And how did you situate yourself within all that chaos? And now we are only like revealing you like after this whole like 3 years. Yeah.
It's been a spiritual journey, Mervin. It's been a spiritual journey. But I was recently reflecting on this, right? And I actually realized, and maybe this is again the rose-tinted reflection, but arguably the hardest part was not the rewriting. The hardest part was being patient and waiting.
The
and
ego
trust.
is the ego. The shell to survive.
And trusting.
Yeah.
Trusting your collaborator and just trusting the timing of it.
I think Late Bloomer is, for me, one of the biggest takeaways is that Late Bloomer is about trust. Yeah, and trusting the process, trusting your collaborator, trusting time, and giving yourself the space and not to rush things when things are not meant to be rushed. Yeah.